silo 10 and 30 were constructed using the same design, decision was taken to empty these silos and to take them out to service.
Good evening, you're watching SAICE TV. I go by the name of Buhle Hlachwayo, and we're here at SAICE Johannesburg's presentation on the Majuba power station called Silo 20 failure. And right here I have Jabu, who is SAICE's chairman of environmental division. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Buhle.
All right, so just to start off, based on today's lecture, what was your experience just being an attendee of it?
I think there's a lot to learn, especially the public and also the people at ESCOM, to learn about the operation and maintenance, because the failure was a result of a maintenance issue which was neglected. Should that been attended to, I think a lot could have been avoided.
All right. And is there anything from the lecture that you would like to take home with you?
I think we need to stick to the design parameters and also ensure that if a structure is designed for something, it sticks to that. And if there's any other parameters that are going to be added onto, that should be borne to by the recipient, which is the client, to say such information must be given to the designers. Not that to assume that if you're using one parameter from one mine, that it should be applicable to all these other core parameters, because the coal buildup was as a result of the density that was higher than what was the silo designed for.
And looking at the conclusion of the failure itself and looking at the solutions as well as the recommendations, are you personally happy with it thus far, or do you think more can be done to reinforce the recommendations?
I think more can be done in terms of education, because here we are speaking about the converted. The people whom this is actually meant for, those people I felt they were not here, which is actually the actual operators, the actual people that actually fill up those silos. Those people need to be the one that learn to understand what the eccentric loading means and how that impacts the actual loading and the pressure that it results on the silo itself.
All right, I'm joined here by Bruno Marai, who gave a lecture on today's presentation on the Majuba power station coal silo 20 failure. Bruno, thank you for joining me.
Thank you very much.
All right, so just to start off, now for those that may not necessarily know so much about the terms in civil engineering, what is a silo?
Silo is a container. It contains various things. It can contain coals, can contain wheat, can contain anything, that even a liquid. But most of the time it contains some solids.
Okay, and tell us more about the failure. How was it caused, and what were the recommendations regarding that?
Well, the failure was caused basically by a substandard standards, okay, which was used at the time. Also at the time was used a coal density which was lower than actual coal density, and altogether eventually over the years caused the problem.
Right. And with this failure, did it affect the productivity at the power station?
Not at all. Within 24 hours half of the station was working, and then the other one was within a week. The whole station was producing electricity, a full blast.
Right.
Not a problem.
Right. And lastly, how did you find the experience of lecturing today's presentation?
Well, it's not the first time I'm doing it, so it was fine, not a problem.
We're joined here by Sisanda, who's a committee member of SAICE Johannesburg. Sisanda, thank you for joining me.
Pleasure to be here.
All right, so one thing I want to ask you first is, how did you find today's lecture on the Majuba power station coal silo 20 failure?
I think as a disclaimer, when it comes to structural components and structural matters, which is what the subject matter was today, just as useless as everybody else. So I think what was informative for me was, obviously this is a state-owned enterprise, and to see where our government funds are going, and when things go wrong, it's always assuring to know that there is someone there who's going to investigate, find out what the problem is and how it can be avoided going forward. So for me, although I didn't understand all the technical nitty-gritties, it is very informative in terms of the methodology and the systematic approach in terms of problem solving that they followed. So from that perspective, I really thought it was interesting and exposed me to something that I don't get to see or do during the normal course of my work.
All right, I'm joined here by Mark Stannard, who's the Managing Director of Stefanucci Stock Civil. Mark, thank you for joining me.
It's a pleasure.
All right, first thing I want to ask you is, how are you involved with today's lecture and other events at SAICE Johannesburg?
Well, we were the civil engineering contractor on this particular project, the reconstruction of the Majuba silo. We were in a consortium with a company called Ruler. They did the structural steel and the mechanical and electrical work, and we did the civil engineering work.
All right, and how did you find today's lecture on the Majuba Power Station coal silo 20 failure?
I found it very interesting because as a contractor, often you don't get too involved in the design issues and the design implications. Today was really a presentation around the design and the problems associated with that led to this failure. So I found it quite refreshing, actually, as an engineer, to listen to this and to be exposed to it.
And lastly, what is the plan going forward with regards to sponsorships for such events?
We as a company are passionate about our industry, and we're always willing to sponsor such events, and especially if we are participants in the subject matter. So going forward, we will carry on sponsoring events and take an active interest in industry functions.